Hey guys, I don't do these much. I just noticed that I'm about to hit 100k subscribers soon, which is pretty cool. So this would be a good opportunity for Frank to like throw up one of those, like this many people watch and they're not subscribed, and look how many people who are subscribed. It's only like 10 or 20% or something. So yeah, you all know the deal. Get to 100k. I'll probably do something cool for that soon or not. I'm not sure. Yeah. Hope you enjoy today's reaction video. Today's video is sponsored by Mir 4. It's a game that's revolutionizing the MMORPG space. One thing that I really liked from my playthrough when I played it last week was the character creation process. As you can see, I made my character look absolutely ridiculous, but there are so many options to make your character look exactly how you want. It's really cool. The gameplay was actually really smooth. It has great graphics for especially being a mobile port. It's really smooth, great FPS. You even have the option by occupying mines in-game battles to obtain Darksteel, which you can use to upgrade your items or to earn. It's up to you. Your most powerful characters can also be owned in new and exciting ways. The game modes of Mir 4, from Castle, Siege, Conquest to Hidden Valley and beyond, are super fun to check out. It was awesome to try the game on stream with you all and experience what We Made has to offer. From the graphics to the storyline to all the intricacies of the Mir 4 world, there's a lot to love about this game. It's available now on PC, Mac, and mobile. Make sure to check it out. Okay, time for the I confronted Blizzard Asmongold interview. All right, let's just get right into it.
Yes, I can.
Okay, all right. Well, the first thing I want to ask is, now that Shadowlands is primarily over, what would you really say are the biggest successes of Shadowlands? What do you think that we can expect to see going forward?
Fucking sick question. This is already a banger. I wouldn't have thought to ask that, but that's like why that's so good is like they've talked about all the things they're changing, which like kind of implies things that they didn't think was good, but like asking and understanding why what you guys did that you thought was great. I hope he doesn't talk about the account wide everything, because that's clear, and they've said that a million times. Everything they've done with alts and account wide and 9.5 and 9.2 is fucking banger and insane, and they're going to continue it, and they've already said that. I'm thinking like the way they approach some of the systems they did for sure.
Definitely covenants. I think covenants. Okay. We want to make sure like that's actually. I think we want to fit those into Dragonflight and
yeah.
So high level, I think narratively, one of the big challenges and exciting things about Shadowlands was making something brand new in World of Warcraft. Like we've over the years mined out a lot of the lore, a lot of the original settings from Warcraft 3 and onwards. And every time comes time to make a new expansion, one of the big questions is like, okay, where's left for us to visit? And I think the challenge of say what you will about Sylvanas, the Jailer, the rest. I think building environments and building characters and cultures in the Enchanted Forest of Ardenweald and the Gothic castles and cities of Revendreth and so forth, and having that feel like an extension of World of Warcraft and having players really vibe with those environments and call them home. I think that was super satisfying for all of us. Obviously, I think along the way, a lot of the realizations we came to in, driven by community feedback over the course of, the middle of Shadowlands, 9.15 and onward, I think are something that will change WoW for the better forever going forward.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I remember watching the Taliesin interview yesterday, excuse me.
No, he was really nervous.
Saying how pretty much all of the stuff is going to be account wide now for Dragonflight, or a lot of the in-game systems.
I'm sure that will be weaponized against me and us, and it's like, hey, Ian, you promised everything.
Yeah,
it's like philosophically, it's get your gear, get your power. That's a character progression. That's part of the journey when you're making a new character. But yeah, access to content, utility, cosmetics, almost all the rest. And we also want to ask the question of like, how fun is the content that you're going to have to do to replay multiple times?
Good question.
Exactly. And the less it is, the more we want to make that optional. Have to be something you can choose whether or not to do.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I'm very relieved to hear that. I know that was something that a lot of people complained about in BFA and also Shadowlands, so it's a huge relief. The next thing is I wanted to ask about the dragon riding abilities in combat. Do you think that we're going to be able to ride these dragons into combat in a battle like Malagos or something crazy like that?
Oh.
Maybe.
Yeah, I was wondering about this.
Yeah, I think one of the things, like we don't have anything planned like that.
I just don't think they're gonna. Yeah, he's gonna say. Yeah, they don't have anything planned right now. They're not gonna be able to help themselves. Just like the beginning of the expansion, you knew for a fact they were going to do a Torghast Anima Power boss. Like you just knew they were. And you knew they were going to do an underwater boss. And you knew they were just going to get their bid out at some point. Like, they were going to fucking convince themselves to do it.
Now I have kind of a much bigger question, is that every expansion, we go up like 100 or 150 item levels. Like, characters at the beginning of the expansion are doing 20,000 DPS. At the end, they're doing 100, like 5x more. And like, we've had so many stat squishes right now. We need one like every other expansion. And like with BFA, we needed one just inside of that expansion. Do you guys see that as a problem, or is that going to be pretty much just the norm going forward?
Okay, so this just kind of goes into like the season mentality in WoW, right? Like, when you go to a new season, because it's a new season, everything should be better than the old season. But there's people that have like nostalgia and old parts of the game where like you would farm this thing from a dungeon and just use it the whole expansion, and like people just miss how it used to be. Like, at the same time though, wouldn't it feel bad if you joined a new season and you had to go back and farm like an old thing from some other thing, or you missed it like in the current version of what's going to be Mythic Plus? Like, is that actually better? Because that's basically what this is. The reason why your damage goes up so much is so every new season your gear is like better than the previous season, which like definitely makes sense. Basically, would the community rather it be the I fucking totally forgot about this dragon. Right? Like if over the course of the expansion, right? Like here it's like your damage is just like this. And like this is like the first patch and this is like the last patch. So it's like slightly better, but it's not a huge deal. I feel like people would just like giga hate that more than what it is now. Like, it would just be boring, kind of. I don't know. Because the other alternative to that is I don't know how many people care about the total amount of number they're doing, as long as what it is relative to everyone else, and as long as their classes are fun.
There are aspects of it that are problematic. I think not having that extra multiplicative borrowed power helps keep that power in check. Like, over the course of Legion, some of your power came from gear. A huge portion of it came from dozens of artifact traits and legendaries and all the rest multiplying across
Very true.
That was great.
But the item level progression, honestly, that's been part of World of Warcraft since, I would say, the middle of Wrath of the Lich King. Mm-hmm. Right around like Ulduar into TOC into Icecrown was the first time in WoW where Blizzard kind of officially said, you don't need to go back and farm old raids anymore. You don't need to keep farming for your DFT all expansion long or whatever. It's just the new tier is a fresh start. And that has a lot of advantages in terms of just accessibility, making it feel like it doesn't matter if you missed a patch, you're not forever behind. You can come back, join your raid guild, play with your friends, jump in, join pubs, whatever, and do the new thing. And that's just kind of how WoW has been for the last 15 years. I think we've experimented a bit with item level gaps between tiers, but what we often find is if an item isn't at least a certain percent better than what you got months ago, and you're having to learn an all-new encounter or go into an all-new challenge to get it,
that's bad.
That just doesn't feel good as a reward.
No, it's bad. Like, MMOs, as a very primary thing, you should be rewarded for the thing. You should be rewarded equally for the amount of effort or challenge you overcame to get something. So, like, if that's a really hard raid boss, imagine killing a really hard raid boss and you get a trinket, and this actually happens with trinkets because trinkets are really hit or miss, but if you get like a helm, but like that helm isn't as good as something that's much easier from like an earlier season. That like fundamentally doesn't make sense, right?
If you're a guild that does normal raids and progresses into heroic over the course of a tier, let's say, but you're going to start in normal of the next tier. If that gear isn't better than what you're wearing, like, what's the point? Where do we even go from there? And so that has dictated certain.
It's a really good answer.
The most important thing is that rewards feel rewarding in the short term, and one of the burdens of the years-long, decades-long life cycle is doing things like squishes. But while we don't love it from an elegance perspective, I think it's better than saying this patch or this raid tier is not going to feel rewarding just so that it buys us more long-term room.
And like, how long do you view that like kind of upgrade cycle being? Because we've had a few of these overlaps happen. Like, you remember like Ashvane's Razor Coral or like Ashara's Font. Do you see it as a positive or a negative, or like, because what happens nowadays is that it feels like you're not really playing the whole expansion. You're just kind of playing just the patch. It's like it's like during Sanctum of Domination, why would you go back into Castle Nathria? And this.
Yeah, because it's seasonal. But like also like things in the past that have been like that have been bad. Like, think about like playing in Tomb of Sargeras, but you had to go get a 2-piece from Nighthold on your character because you needed a 4+2. Or think about in Antorus going back to get Tomb of Sargeras tier. And also, as long as they make really good, impactful, different, unique trinkets, there are always going to be some from previous raids that are good. Like trinkets already kind of do that in the game. And the only way they aren't like that is if you make every single trinket the same value and they're basically just stat sticks. It's like, you know, either procs haste or crit, or it has passive haste and crit or mastery, and then it procs main stat. Then everything scales linearly with eye level. But I think like at least most PvE people, I would very much like to have things like Razor Coral and Font and things like that are, well, actually Font's kind of a weird example because honestly I think Font was really overpowered, but it's kind of like a dookie trinket. But like just cool, interesting trinkets that change the way you think and like have different power levels for different reasons, I think are really cool, and they should exist in every raid. And if you go back to an old raid to use one of those, I think that's okay. But I don't think it makes sense for regular gear. Like there's just no way it would ever make sense for a helm or a chest or a necklace or something from a previous raid just be better than everything in the previous one. I feel like way more people would have a problem with that than people who would like it. I think the only reason to like that is nostalgia. It's just not better.
Especially nowadays, why don't you go back? And it seems like you're trying to solve that problem a little bit in Season 4 with like these new affixes and things like that. So is that something that we can expect to see going forward into Dragonflight?
Not initially,
okay.
I don't think, but the Season 4 experiment, like I think as a capstone to expansions, is something that if this works, you know, I'd love to repeat and love to have a little bit of a remix to help avoid content droughts at the end of expansions, along with, of course, just getting the damn expansion out faster.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I think a lot of this is listening to what players prefer. You know, I think a lot of what we've heard is that when there are those one or two outlier items from prior tiers that feel relevant long term, we get negative feedback on that. People don't really feel like they want to have to go back and farm up Sylvanas daggers or whatever else, particularly if
Old
they
Warrior
skip that
Soul,
tier, and now you're like, oh, I want to switch to
Jathis.
Rogue in, you know, for Sepulcher. Oh, I have to go find pugs and go back and do this other thing. And also, you know, when it's the idea of making more stuff in that space, people are often happy to move on from a setting that they've spent months in, whether it's, you know, raiding with a guild, progressing, or pugging. A new environment is part of what's exciting there. So I think we're open to it, and if there's a couple of outliers, we definitely don't want to, you know, stop those items from being exciting. But I'm not sure, you know, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I'll certainly look at feedback that comes out after this interview, but I'm not sure people are clamoring to have reasons to go back and do Sanctum every week right now.
Yeah, definitely not.
It's weird because, like, for some people, I think they enjoy it. For others, they don't. I mean, I know that, you know, you can always go back and think of the items from, like, BC or even Wrath, or especially Classic. It's like people went back and remember they used that Classic trinket in, like, on Lich King, right? Like, that kind of stuff is really cool.
Scarab Brooch. Yeah.
Yes, the Scarab Brooch from Vicitus, exactly. And
I completely disagree with this. Like, just no problem with disagreeing with someone, but I just completely disagree.
That stuff is great, but at the same time, it's just not, it can be frustrating for people at the same time. And so it's like where that balance is. But you're, in general, okay with a few items spanning a couple of tiers?
I would say a couple of tiers is probably a lot. I think one tier is fine.
I guess so.
Yeah, something like Sylvanas daggers is fine.
No Arcana Crystal?
Yeah, no, not so much, no.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I mean, now that we're talking about loot, why do you not want to bring back Master Looter?
Here we go. This is the big banger. Okay, I don't know. Again, I don't really ever like plan out how I'm going to do this, but like there's a lot to go on here, and I don't know. I feel like after this video, I'll probably do a bigger tangent on Masterloot, or as usual, once I start talking about it, I'll have more takes on it, and then I might end up doing it now. I'm not sure. We'll see.
So I'm sure everyone is like, why are you even wasting time asking this question? I've answered it 50 times. What if
That's what I would have thought. I would have never thought he would have had the, as I've heard, the like positive reception to this. Oh my God, what a screen cap of him. But he is looking like he's about to do something naughty, doesn't he? But yeah, I had thought they would have never brought this back. So hearing them seem somewhat positive about it is very interesting.
I kind of do want to bring back Masterloot.
Okay.
Okay. The team does. So it's an interesting, something we've been reflecting on a lot in the last like year and a half. And looking at, you know, places where we in the community have differed over the years and kind of reevaluating some of our thinking. Loot is a tricky one. I think going back to Legion, we had personal loot and group loot in parallel, and maintaining like two versions of loot, both in terms of how its data is set up, the UI experience, the code, was a mess. And that was something we wanted to get out of for a bunch of reasons. And I think at the time, we were looking at group loot, saw a bunch of problems with this structure we built. We're like, let's tear it down, let's lay new foundations, let's build a new system that's all personal. And over the last few years, we've been iterating on it and refining it and adding rules and exceptions. But there's a lot of problems with it. Clarity around what's tradable is pretty bad. The feeling of, hey, an item just dropped, and it's technically an eye level upgrade, but I'm not going to use it, and I can't give it to my friends.
Yep, dog shit. That is the worst part about personal loot by far.
That feels pretty bad. We certainly haven't, solved degenerate behavior from world first guilds. If anything, it's gotten worse with all the cross server stuff.
Seems that way.
And
yeah, that's not wrong, by the way. I feel like maybe some of you guys were looking for me to react to that and be like, no, I mean, what we do is degenerate. It's insanely degenerate. And that's important to actually understand from their standpoint, because they know no matter what they do, that's not going to change. And how much I know that they don't think the way we think, and why it's pointless for them to make changes for the overall game to try to stop it, especially because we're such a small part of the game. Here's the most telling thing to me. Is Morgan Day had an interview earlier in this patch cycle. I think it wasn't about Dragonflight, and he was talking about it was the Race to World. Morgan Day did a Race to World first recap, and he was talking about how excited he was to come in on Mythic Tuesday and be like, oh, I'm coming into the office, I wonder what Mythic bosses they've done, and I wonder what bosses are going well or whatever. And then he was like, oh, and then I was surprised to see that they were doing splits. But from someone looking at it from our perspective, no guild would have gone right into Mythic without doing splits with personal loot tier. It would have just been an objective error. You would have messed up. Seriously, it was impossible to think that every guild, without talking to each other at all or ever talking about it, knew that no one was going to go into the raid for 2 days because of just the way personal loot tier worked. And it was very telling to me when he responded, and clearly no one at Blizzard even thought of that when it was the only actual option. So I definitely think them going forward with their decision making, If they can make changes that stop degen shit without affecting the rest of the game, that's fine. I just think very little thought should be put into it, because we're always going to do shit like that. Always. It's gotten to a point, and it's been this way for years and years and years and years and years, but it's always people are never going to do something that doesn't give them a... Lily, come here. Sorry. 1 second. God damn it. So Blizzard is trying to think of ways that, will stop us from what we do, but we're always going to do it. And they should not really put much thought into this. I actually really believe that was one of the reasons. So if you remember when they removed Masterloot, you're listening to the way Ian's talking about it now, there were interviews back then that was they went into a new expansion before Personal Loot came out, and they were like, we're looking at ways to reduce splits that these guilds are doing. And this is before the World First Race even was streamed and was popular. Once I gotta close this door or something. And I always thought that and I think that did cause problems. I think they've made changes to this game, and they've definitely done it with the Race World First in mind. Now, I don't think they should just ignore it. Number one, it obviously markets the shit out of their game. And also it shows in which a way, if someone wanted to, a way to exploit your loot system. But there's always going to be degen stuff. The best example of this ever was Echo in Castle Nathria. Echo in Castle Nathria had most, if not all of their players have 4 to 5 plus characters, and one of them had 9. And there wasn't any tier. There wasn't anything. It wasn't like this raid where you just gave yourself, 4 loot chances on each character to get your 4th tier piece and guarantee 4 piece in week 2. Or in the first week of Mythic when Lords of Dread and Rygolon came out. They did it for just which character got the best heroic loot. And you're talking about, in the best case scenario, past 2 to 3 characters where it has a lot of diminishing returns. I mean, just the most minuscule, irrelevant thing. It didn't even matter, right? That's the level. There could be nothing to do, and people will still spend every waking minute they have alive during these races preparing for them. So just trying to reduce that at this point is just a lost cause. But I want to hear more of how this got into it, because I don't even know why he brought that up.
Pretty bad. It's technically an eye level upgrade, but I'm not going to use it, and I can't give it to my friends. That feels pretty bad. We certainly haven't, solved degenerate behavior from world first guilds. If anything, it's gotten worse. Solved, and I can't give it to my friends. That feels pretty bad. We certainly haven't, solved degenerate behavior from world first guilds.
Yeah, definitely, and you're never going to solve it. I mean, you can definitely for example, you guys are talking about bringing back Masterloot, right? Right now. We do a bunch of raids every week during Heroic Week. We just spam runs and invite people and trade them gold and advertise on Twitter and have them like join the run. Like, yeah, that's a bad look. It just looks stupid. It is stupid, right? But if Masterloot existed, yeah, there wouldn't be any like, it would feel better because yeah, you're doing just as many runs, but at least you're like putting gear on characters instead of hoping someone in some raids, this actually is real. You would hope someone loots a helm on the first boss and loots one by like the second to last boss, and then it can trade it. And like you do an entire run for like one extra piece of gear instead of like every piece of gear being traded, right? I just really don't think they should do a lot of things with the race world first in mind, because it just doesn't reflect how most players play the game. Like, we have a totally different opinion on personal loot than like most people who play this game. But that thing he mentioned right before this still definitely applies, where a raider can loot a trinket that is terrible for him and he would never use it. But even though it's an eye level upgrade, he cannot give it to his friend. That doesn't make sense. And I'm hearing people say like, oh, well, they just need to have something like Masterloot where everyone has to agree to it when you turn it on and stuff like that. Guys, it's like one of the biggest anti-Masterloot takes is like this straw man that people are like ninjaing loot in pugs. That doesn't happen. Guild Masterloot, you already have to have 80% of the people in a guild to be able to see that. You could join any pug, even if it didn't say guild group, and see that 80% of the people or a lot of people are from a guild, and you can see Masterloot on and be like, yo, what's the deal with Masterloot? You can leave that run. That's not the majority of runs. Every run you see in the group finder isn't some like Masterloot, like ninja looting scenario. Like, that's just not real. It just helps guilds, and most people will be personal loot anyway. Like I said earlier, like when personal loot existed, and this is really interesting to hear how he says how they even would bring it back, because it would be really complicated. Because of the way they set up things in personal loot, it's actually like in the past, there was a reason to use both. Like if you got to a boss and you wanted to master loot it, you would get 5 items for master looting and 6 items for personal loot. So you would get 20% more loot by choosing personal loot. It would just go across everyone in your guild evenly, instead of just, in Masterloot's case, if you're being optimal, of course. And I know a lot of people, it's not lost on me that a lot of people will copy what our guilds do and do the same thing. But you would just give it to DPS players. Any piece of gear you give to a healer or a tank over a DPS is a mistake, basically, at the highest level of playing. There are some caveats to that, like if it's like a 20 eye level upgrade for a healer and a 5 for a DPS, like it's probably better for the healer. But if it's an even upgrade, it's never close. Who does that suck for? Tanks and healers, a big part of the game, right? And casual players who are just like trying to play and get loot. Very reasonable reason to play any MMO or game, right? That progression system. But you can choose personal loot the exact same way it is now, and you actually get more loot than master loot. Every good guild will always, or a guild that cares about their progression will always choose master loot, because 5 items where you could choose where it goes is way better than getting 6 randomly. But you have that choice. There will be guilds right now. If you raid in a personal loot guild that doesn't trade items, they can make it so there would really be no reason for you to swap back. That being said, though, they already mentioned how having 2 loot systems created a lot of problems. And the last time Master Loot existed, it did have a lot of really ancient things about it, right? I'll give an example. If you had an entire raid of cloth, leather, and plate, and you only had 0 to 1 male user, it had just as much of a chance to drop male than it did everything else. That's where it's wrong. So like a good way to solve that would potentially be, you know, having loot basically drop based on who's in the raid. Like think about the loot that drops on the boss. It's generated by who's in the raid, and then it would then be master looted, right? But I'm sure they'll probably cover that.
If anything, it's, you know, gotten worse with all the cross server
Seems
stuff
that way.
And buyers. And so we're, you know, taking a hard look at where we want to land going forward. The challenge is we've spent like 6 years building on those new foundations.
Wait, dude, why does so many people in chat
want to land going
just
forward,
said like
buyers.
It feels so good to hear
And so we're, you know, taking a hard look at
it feels so good to hear him say that. What does that even imply? That like literally everyone involved knows what Race World First guilds will do for gear is degenerate. Like that's not like it would be impossible to have any other opinion, right?
Forward, the challenge is we've spent like 6 years building on those new foundations, and so it's not just something where you can flip a switch and say, all right, everything works the way it did. But I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, keeping personal loot in some spaces like Outdoor World, trash in dungeons and raids. Like I don't think anyone needs, you know.
Who cares about World First, should be irrelevant. In changes they make, yeah, but also I've actually saw this personally, like when I went to the LCS thing over the weekend, where people will come up to you and like, how many people actually come back to play the game because the race world first? It's obviously not relevant because of view count. That doesn't need to be defended. But I think you'd be surprised. It is definitely not lost on Blizzard what the race world, the very unique thing being the race world first exactly in this game does for retaining players or bringing players back or just marketing the game in general.
Group loot trappings there.
That's for sure.
But the core experience of like you kill a raid boss.
I think that's what led them to have the raid be. I think the reason the raid was the way it was this time was because they were trying to make it longer and like make it more interesting, but obviously that kind of bit them.
4 things. First, personal loot in some spaces like outdoor world, trash and dungeons and raids.
Yeah,
like I don't
should
think
never
anyone
change
needs,
that.
Group loot trappings there. But the core
or
experience
dungeons
of like you kill a raid boss, there's 4 things on the corpse, and you figure out what you want to do with those 4 things. That's something we'd like to get back to. I don't have the ability to promise that all the work to make that happen can occur in just the next few months. But in terms of long-term heading, I think that's what we're thinking.
So it's not that the team is necessarily ideologically opposed to this. It's just that there was a lot of tech problems and like the dissonance, and I think it was Taurus whenever this happened, just caused up problems.
So that's the next few months. The thing you guys were big time biting on. Like I said, I've been saying, I actually think they're going to. I think season 4 is going to come out very shortly after 9.1 or 9.2.5, and I think the expansion has a chance of coming out this year, even though I hope it comes out in the next one. But yeah, definitely something to think about.
Is necessarily ideologically opposed to this. It's just that there was a lot of tech problems and like the dissonance, and I think it was Taurus whenever this happened, just caused up problems.
Huh?
It's basically just, we are.
I mean, they definitely were like, is that really right? They weren't necessarily ideologically opposed to it. It was a technical limitation to allow it to be in the game with the current way loot is done versus before. Like part of that sounds right, but like that can't be.
Tools, our code, every assumption we've made in how we build loot tables from 2018 onwards
I think he
has gone in one direction, and now we would need to just turn back around. And I think there's a lot of questions to figure out also. I think we should also bear in mind that going back to group loot means that like you can have a bow drop with no hunters in the raid.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a thing that will happen and feels bad, but that's kind of okay.
Transmog piece.
Yeah. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's good that you do that, because the alternative is, again, the raid personal loots. If it's just personal loot, but it drops on the boss and can be traded, you would just exploit that by, I mean, you guys can probably imagine the Race World first splits right now, right? 30 druids master loot for like 2 druid mains or something. I mean, it's not going to be too much different though. Basically what you're going to get is, 3 to 4 mains, 26 other people that are not mains, and every single piece of gear going to those 4 players, split by armor type or split by tier depending on the raid.
Yeah, because the thing we can't have happen is a world where loot is still smart, and if you stack a group with like 6 warriors, you're only going to get warrior loot, and it's completely tradable with no restrictions. That just kind of breaks everything. So we need to just figure out a middle ground going forward, but that's something we want to do.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I guess that does definitely make sense. I mean, logistically, it seems like it would be very, very easy to stack a raid in that regard. And, I would advocate for that, but that's a little bit too much in my own personal interest. But another thing is that the add-ons nowadays, we see that there's a huge UI redesign that's being done with Dragonflight, and I think that's a good thing. And you see nowadays, like many people, whenever they're joining a guild, having weak auras or having DBM is pretty much required, and it creates like this artificial gap between like casual players and hardcore players. It's kind of like a 2-part question, and like number one, like does the team, just straight up, does the team design like these like heroic and like mythic encounters for add-ons? Same with like Mythic Plus. And the second part is,
good question.
Are we going to see more of these features incorporated into the game?
Yeah, this is a big question, because I feel like the cat's out of the bag. Like let's just say they spent a ton of time working on WoW's like UI and systems and stuff like that, and then they just didn't allow add-ons anymore. The game would not, I'm not talking about outcry and people being mad. The game would actually just be worse. I would love to see raid content. I would love to see raid content without weak auras just being a computational way of solving everything. I just think it would be more fun. That being said, it would also mean that raids would be a lot easier. Like, he basically asked the question, like, has Blizzard made their raid mechanics harder over the years?
because they know that people have weak auras, yes. Now, they've nerfed weak auras every time they were, in my opinion, like way too powerful. But like, yeah, like absolutely. Or else it would just be it would just be insanely easy trivial content. Like, you can probably think of multiple things right now where, like, think of a mechanic that isn't solved with weak auras. Like, I'm trying to think of like bombs on Jailer, on Mythic Jailer. Like, that is just a small something where, like, the amount of just individual deaths and mistakes you'd have to that would just be insane. This looks like they talked about this for a while. So let's see what they get at. And also, just hopefully no one in chat or he ever makes any comparison to this. Every time someone talks about add-ons being a part of raiding, they mention Final Fantasy, and I cannot begin to describe how bad of a comparison comparing that game's rating and this game's rating and pointing out that one has add-ons and one doesn't. Like, it is the worst argument of all time. There's no ground to stand on there. I'm sure they won't, though.
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. It's something we spend a lot of time, especially recently, debating. We design acknowledging the existence of add-ons. I think we have to. Sometimes we're actually designing and implementing mechanics in ways that are going to try to work around add-ons, whether it's like entering the code to disarm the bomb on Mekatork, or the Among Us game on Lords of Dread, fixing stuff to plug loopholes that people found, because we know, like, hey, we have this idea that could be really fun gameplay, but if an add-on solves the whole thing for you, then what's the point? We have to acknowledge its existence. Ultimately, we're tuning raid encounters in particular with two goals. One, it should be fun. It's kind of goal number one. Goal number two is it should provide an appropriate progression experience for the difficulty and where it is in the raid. And so, a heroic boss that's like late in the tier, our goal ultimately, we probably want that to take like 10, 15 wipes to beat, maybe a couple nights. Ideally a good progression experience is for a heroic guild, you spend your first night, make good progress, you're getting to the start of phase 3, you come back the next night, you tighten up your execution, you get the kill, feels good. Feels like you earned something, but it's also not super frustrating. If you walk in and you kill the boss in 2 pulls, that's a letdown. We actually, you didn't really get to feel the progression experience that you're looking for. And the reality is, people are using add-ons. And so if we build an encounter that was theoretically, completely doable and targeted at, assuming you don't have add-ons at all and aim for that difficulty target, people are going to use DVM and weak auras and go in and simplify mechanics and have an easier than intended time.
Yeah, that doesn't really happen. Like, I actually don't. I'm trying to think of a boss that has a weak aura for it that massively trivializes the difficulty of the fight as opposed to what they intended. I'm trying to think of like Lihivum. I think it's Lihivum. Well, no, you don't know. You don't need a Lihivum. We did the Lihivum strat without a weak aura for a really long time. Fate Scribe? Yeah, definitely Fate Scribe. Raden? No, Raden, you just rotate in an order and that order never changes. Because, like, believe me, I've, like, had these thoughts before. Like, we basically have to decide on mechanics, like, which ones are too easy to use a weak aura and which one do we, like, try to do it. Like, we tried to, like, do a weak aura for, like, the 9 in Sanctum. And, like, you do it, like, twice and you're like, dude, let's just fucking YOLO this. Like, this boss is easy. Same thing in the Sausage, right? Like, we had this, like, Venthyr strat where we, like, use Venthyr to, like, port over certain waves. And we just did the boss edition. We're like, this doesn't matter, man. That boss is easy. You don't need to do that. Like, and you had, like, weak aura help for those. Like, so I think about this a lot. There are not many fights that are just, like, directly trivialized or weak auras, like, totally change the experience, especially when you consider the fact that they probably make some of these things with weak auras in mind. The only thing that I ever was really questioned that is, I forget who was doing, I think it was Morgan Day was doing the interview, and he got asked an add-on question, and he said that every mechanic in the game is designed to be dealt with without add-ons and without being in voice. And the thing that really brought me to that more than anything else is the Among Us weak aura on, or the Among Us mechanic on Lords of Dread. Like, legit fucking how? Like, how could you do that without voice? Like, you can do it without the weak aura for sure with voice. Like, we did it when the fight first came out. You just type, like, Mekatork without voice and weak auras? Yeah, exactly. I mean, he used that as an example, right? He's like, we wanted to make it so weak auras wouldn't work, but yeah. But maybe that guy misspoke, but that is what he said, without voice or add-ons. And, like, there's definitely mechanics in the game that exist definitely because those things exist. That's my only point.
So we have to acknowledge it in that world.
Rewind a little bit.
Assuming you don't have add-ons at all and aim for that difficulty target, people are going to use DBM and weak auras and go in and simplify mechanics and have an easier than intended time. So we have to acknowledge it in that world.
So ban add-ons, this guy says. Like, that's just, like, not an option. Also, just no question, banning add-ons will just make the game worse. Maybe I'm okay, dude, honestly, hit me up for, like, breaking, like, in-fight add-ons. I'm actually cool with that. I'd be okay with that. I'd be okay with that being different. But that would break so many other quality of life things in the game that are great.
Do we want you to feel like you have to download third-party programs to succeed in your game? Nope.
That's dog shit.
None of that.
That, again, another thing. Sorry, I'm pausing so much. Actually, I'm not, because that's what reacting is. But like anytime a new player gets in and feels like they have to download things to do content, that is bad. That is probably the biggest argument against it of all time. Is that
feels good. Over the years, we've tried to incorporate aspects of that functionality in our base. Even, sometimes it's just design, like making telegraphs better, or using the energy bars of bosses, mana bars, other ways of signaling, hey, when this bar fills up, a huge ability is going to happen, so you don't need a timer to let you know to prepare for it.
Correct. And Halanders. Halanders is maybe the best example of this they've ever done. Yes, people had those Halanders weak auras that, like in the corner of your screen, it would be like a bar, and it would be ticking down, and it would be like, there's 6 seconds left, and now, like, THD lock is dropping, right? And then, like, that's in the corner of your screen or on, like, the side of your screen, and then it would obviously, like, it would get picked up, and it would say, like, bomb is on the ground, and it would be ticking down from 10. And it would say fired up has the bomb. It'd be ticking down from 10. Right? Like, that is a weak aura that does that fight, but you don't need that. Like, I would actually say that's, like, entirely minor, because what people were actually looking at was, like, because you on your UI doing this fight have to look at what's going on your screen. What you really looked at was the bomb thing over your head that was, like, ticking down like this and, just going in a circle and, like, letting you know when it's going to blow up. That was just entirely in the game, and I would guess that, like, 90% of drops and pickups were entirely based on looking at this in-game thing. And, like, this is just entirely separate. Basically, all of Halandris could have and basically was done without weak auras, and it was an extremely difficult boss. That's just an excellent example of how they put things in the game that don't even really require weak auras, because as long as they're there, they're always going to be there to make it easier, but it's very minor.
Information is something we want to continue to improve and provide in our game. I think that's a core function of encounter design. The problem that we've seen, and that we don't really know how to solve, frankly, right now, is that over the last few years especially, add-ons have moved out of informational into more and more computational.
It's insane.
And like that, then that's the kind of thing that's like solving the problem for you doesn't feel like a thing that it'd be bizarre for our own UI to do. Like, and a random example, we were talking about this actually in the office last week. Wrath Classic's coming out later this year. Eventually, you're gonna get to Ice Crown Citadel. Random encounter from Wrath that came to mind was like Blood Queen Lanethel and Ice Crown Citadel. Really simple fight, couple of mechanics, almost patchwork level, but the one signature mechanic, of course, was gotta turn to a vampire, bite other people so that you don't get mind controlled. Back in the day, I think as a raid leader anyway, I think most people kind of call that out on the fly.
Call out names,
yeah. Like you have some rough sense of like, hey, these are our top DPS, or these are people who are bite the healers last. See what happens, and it's fun. You have frantic call outs, and it could be hard. Sometimes you would wipe just because you had to go from 8 to 16. People got confused. I can guarantee that when Wrath Classic Lanethel comes around, it's going to be get a weak aura.
Yep.
You list the people in your raid from top to bottom in terms of DPS priority. Everyone installs the weak aura, and when you become a vampire, all it's going to say is fight this person. No one has to speak. No one has to do anything. That's not great all around.
No, it's not good. Like I can give you an anecdote from myself. Since we've been going for world firsts and winning world firsts, so I'll use like the first raid we won, Nyalotha. I can tell you just from then till now how much of my job as a raid leader and what I think I'm really good at, like kind of improvising and dealing with that in the middle of fights, that role has been lessened by a lot. And I don't like what I do now as much as I did then, because in just the sake of getting better, your job as a raid leader should be replaced by a computational weak aura on someone's UI. Again, that is good. It is better. And like as your weak aura game and your weak aura makers and your preparation gets better, you want to replace anything anyone can do to improvise in the moment by having a weak aura take care of it. And just saying that out loud sounds like ass. And the example he gave is exactly right. That's in ancient times. Like, that was fucking forever ago. But that is true. People are absolutely going to have a weak aura entirely deal with that mechanic for them. And that's basically how everything is being done nowadays. So
that doesn't feel like where we want our raid encounters to land. In some ways, it stops us from doing cooperative mechanics and coordination that's fun. And I think, like, all of this was always possible. People just never did it. Like, in add-ons back in the day, like, bigwigs and stuff actively tried to avoid even making strategy recommendations. It was purely informational. And so maybe there's like an alternate timeline where if guilds had been doing this stuff 12 years ago, the same way AVR got locked down, or like back in Classic, cast canceling add-ons and decursive got changed, maybe that change would have happened. But now we have like a decade worth of add-ons, including things you use to play your rotation better and all the rest, that are built on that framework. So it's not clear what the path forward is. I think we would have to...
I will say that is something that... How has WoW like really avoided that? I feel like rotation doers or helpers are like very rare. I think that's for two reasons. Number one, so many more class used to actually have rotations. And now they don't really have rotations as much as priority systems, because they added a, like procs into basically every class, where what you do every pull is like really never the same, which is really fucking good, by the way. It's a very good part of the design of their game. So now you still have add-ons like that. It's just they're not nearly as optimal, because it's just not as smart as you are as a player reacting in real time, which is, I think, something that they've done. I don't know if that was in response to those being a thing, because I remember they used to be much more popular when it was much more black and white what your like rotation was.
Have to like do something like restrict what
is it? I feel like rotation mods hurt more than help a player, of course, because you don't learn how to play your class. You just press a single button. I think it's pretty uncommon. But yeah, you should definitely never use one of those, because like WoW classes are not hard enough to actually do that at a base level, and you'll never get better at anything if you do that.
APIs can access, at least in raids and dungeons. Maybe try to offer more of the like proc tracking, class mechanic stuff in our base UI, and maybe get to a place where we can design encounters from the ground up. Still hard, still meant to, take a couple dozen pulls on heroic or 100.
Wait, what did he say?
Maybe what add-on APIs can access, at least in raids and dungeons.
Look at what add-on API can access.
Try to offer more of the like proc tracking, class mechanic stuff in our base UI, and maybe get to a place where we can design encounters from the ground up. Still hard, still meant to, take couple dozen pulls on heroic or 100 pulls if it's a late mythic end boss. That's not what we're not talking about nerfing stuff. We're making it easier, but we'd have to make those changes in concert. It's a lot to tackle, and I know that
that's like the best shit I've heard in my life. I fucking love that. Amen to that. The only problem is there are things like weak auras that are unbelievably fucking good for like yeah, you can make it here's what would be a perfect world for me. Timers still exist. So just very simple, just having a thing on your screen that just shows the timers of things happening. I think that's perfectly fine in WoW. Weak auras for your UI and debuffs and buffs and things like that still exist. But like the whole, like going farther than that, I think the game would actually just be better. Now, he's interesting. He's saying he wants this to still be hard. I think stuff could definitely, if they make the same content while doing that, like fights will definitely be harder than they are now. But I think Halandris, like I said before, would be in like a really good mark for like how to make an extremely hard boss where add-ons have basically zero impact.
For a lot of players, hey, we broke the thing that you rely on that makes the game, feel more accessible to you, isn't exactly a good message to swallow either.
Yep.
So,
yep. People would not, yeah, I'm not saying everyone would like that. I'm just saying I would fucking love if weak auras from raid were gone. Just fucking gone. Right. That's also like, I certainly don't speak for all raiders when I say that. I can just tell you that I objectively have less fun raid leading in WoW than I did in Nyalotha and Castle Nathria, because just part of my job is gone, basically, right? But that's like a very personal thing for me. I'm not sure how the raiding community in general would feel about that.
no easy answers, but it's something we're thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I think so. I remember very clearly back in ICC where AVR got disabled, and then also, didn't that happen also in Nighthold with like Star Augur and Exorcist too?
Yeah, it was like that. Yeah, that was like different ways of putting
the
3D
lines,
stuff, attaching to nameplate.
Interesting. He mentioned Star Augur and Nighthold. There is two major times in WoW's recent history where they, since AVR, where weak ores were clearly doing more than they should. Archimond is example number 1 and probably the best example, and Nighthold is number 2, where after both of those times, they absolutely gutted the functionality of weak ores.
Yeah.
So have you all ever thought about actually just like disabling the combat add-ons? Has there ever been conversations about that, or is it just kind of an idea?
It's an idea that we've had conversations about. The challenge is like, the fundamental piece is, can add-ons tell what buffs and debuffs you have on you and members of your group have on them? If we say no, okay, cool, we just broke like all raid frames, everything that you use to, even just baseline.
Just use Final Fantasy 14 setup with WoW and it would be perfect. That is a fucking... Actually, you either don't play WoW at all and you're just saying that, or you've never played both games and rating and understand how that affected. That is like totally fucking bullshit. That is such an idiotic thing to say.
Tracking uptime of your slice and dice or whatever. You just want an add-on that makes that easier to see. We broke all of that. Wow. That would be, I think, pretty ruinous for a good chunk of our player base to do suddenly.
Yeah.
So I think we want to try to figure out a path forward, but it's not clear.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. And will we be seeing some of those improvements?
Yeah, the fucking do it. As much as I am someone who would want specifically computational weak auras, not quality of life and not UI related weak auras for raids, I think if it's required to get rid of that to basically break the functionality entirely of weak auras, I think that would just be bad for the game. Because most of its quality of life and most of it's really good, it would basically make everyone's frames have to like start anew. However, they're coming out with new frames and new shit where you can move it around. So like, I'm thinking that right now. Like maybe if I play on alpha for a month, I can guarantee. I actually asked my raiders this. I was like, how many of you guys do you think are gonna fuck around and maybe swap to Blizzard default after they change it? And a lot of them were like, I probably will. I'm gonna look at it because it's probably gonna be really fluid if it's new. So it's definitely something to think about. That's for sure. I would definitely entertain it, but I think for the majority of the game, breaking all add-ons is definitely not a good thing for the game. And if there's the only way it would be good is if you can pick and choose what would be able to do that, and it sounds like you can't do that.
And kind of some of those implementations of some add-on features in the new UI that's going to be coming out in Dragonflight?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something, and I guess we didn't get a chance to really touch on it in the deep dive. Crash Reed, who was the UI designer speaking in that deep dive, one of the things that he's worked on is kind of it's kind of trying to replicate what a lot of people do with weak auras, which is centralizing information about buff uptime, debuff uptime, cooldown tracking, kind of pulling that information towards the center of your screen. So the default UI experience, we can flag abilities for your class as things that you should be able to track very visibly. We can even show things, externals, like if you're a tank and someone puts paint suppression on you, paint suppression duration should be right there in the middle of your screen under your character if you opt to have that on.
Fucking awesome. This is actually a little bit of the first information we're hearing apparently about what other changes are coming to default UI, because all we see is new raid frames, cleaned things up, everything's able to be moved freely. But like stuff like that, I feel like could be insane, and even at a default level would be basically what any good weak aura is for that now.
To your shield wall or whatever else, because that's helping you manage your own ability usage. Again, of course, like a pro tank with weak auras is going to customize things that's like just for them, but we want the default out of the box experience to be much, much better. And we know that like it's not realistic to design mechanics that ask you to track uptime of a buff.
If it was even close, if you came up with something in the game out of the box, as he says, that's even close to a lot of good external weak auras that tanks or really any good player should have available to them, especially dungeon players, people would use that instead of an add-on, even if the add-on was slightly better. And the reason why is like anytime they'd be logging onto beta, or if like it ever breaks or doesn't work, you'd have something that for sure works always. Like that is absolutely true. That I would say that easily for me. Like if it was even close, dude, I would use that. So I wouldn't worry about them like having people like, some people always want it exactly how they want it. But like what he just described for externals or buffs being on you, that you have the ability in the game to whitelist and blacklist what kind of buffs and stuff you'd want to show up. Yeah, I mean, that basically is what all the good add-ons are, right? Like
when that buff is like a flashing thing in the corner of your screen 12 inches away from where your eyes are focused otherwise, we need to do better. Dragonflight's UI isn't just aesthetic, it's trying to tackle that too.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that. I think that's something that's long overdue, and I know almost everybody uses something that's similar to that too. And I was also wondering, obviously add-ons make it easier, and I don't really ever think that we're going to see a world where none of the raids or dungeons are on PTR or something. But were you all happy with what happened with the with Sepulchre and not having some of those fights on the PTR? Because I do think that data mining and a certain degree of it, like for example, we saw the jailer's corpse before we knew what happened at the end of the raid. It's a little bit of a spoiler, right? So like, do you think that
there will always be data mining? Would you rather have, like, I think Wowhead is a tremendous resource for this game. Like, being able to go on Wowhead and search any item or proc or anything about the game, that can only exist with data mining. Like, there is not one or the other. And I don't mean Wowhead does data mining and posts it. Like, I'm sure Blizzard would like that not to be there, like, specifically the lore stuff. I don't think, like, data mining, like, I don't know if they can prevent or try to break that. What was the thing he asked right before this? Okay, so I hope his answer is, okay, I really doubt they do this again, even though I want them to, because I really think the whole, like, last three bosses situation this time was, like, very different than it's ever been done before. That being said, if there was ever a chance that they do it again, what they said before this raid was, like, if this goes well, we could consider doing it in the future. It did go well, right? Like, of the bosses that were not tested and released basically on Mythic, that was Halandris. Even though Halandris technically wasn't, it really was, because the version on PTR and testing was an entirely different boss. Rygalon, Lords of Dread, and the last boss. None of those had, like, very few bugs in them. Like, some were overtuned. Most of them were nerfed before they were killed. But that's true of most bosses. That's consistent across the board. There weren't a lot of bugs. And the fights were, like, the fully formed ideas of the fights were actually really good. The sole exception to that is probably Lords of Dread only having certain abilities give you extra damage during the swarms instead of it just being a damage amp, like what they eventually changed it to be. Like, that decision was definitely, like, super fucking weird that, like, made a lot of classes bad for no reason. Like, that was, like, a super strange thing, and they obviously fixed it really fast. But other than that, like, the bosses that were released like that were fine. Anduin stars, guys, Anduin was tested, and the reason those Anduin stars happened like that was because of a change they made during the fight. That has nothing to do with this conversation. I think overall it went really, really well, but I don't think they'll do it again. Like, the idea I had, like, the coolest thing is, yeah, stuff will be data mined and whatever, but would it be cool if you just walked up to a boss or a raid and you didn't even know the boss's names, and there was no dungeon journal, and you walked up and the first time a guild kills the boss, it unlocks, like, the dungeon journal for their region or something. But other than that, you just have to go in and figure it out and no testing. Yes, that's probably, like, the best case scenario, I think. That would be pretty cool. I just don't think they would ever do that. That's the only problem. But I guess we'll find out.
That is a negative thing for the game, and do you think that we'll see more content not being on PTR and players actually experiencing it whenever it comes out?
I think we're happy with how the Sepulchre bosses worked out. You know, they weren't, like, completely free of bugs, but overall, I think it was a smooth experience for all the guilds that went through it and all difficulties. And the fact that, like, it was a genuine surprise and people were figuring it out as they went, like, all of that was exciting to see.
Yeah, like, dude, doing Lords of Dread and Rygalon on Mythic Tuesday was really, really cool. Like, we spent a ton of time, like, drawing and visually, like, graphically trying to see and give people the best preparation before the raid they could for these bosses, and a lot of it was different and it changed and it was just, like, you know, like, just seeing something new like that, just even on Heroic, the very first thing you did when you logged in was really fucking cool.
We'd like to do more of that. Data mining in general, I mean, I think when it comes to story, definitely makes for some odd, like, piecemeal experiences where this portion of the story is visible, but then, like, no one knows what the cinematic is, so then all of the focus becomes, you know, the cinematic as opposed to the entire story that's told in context. Yeah, ultimately, we want to strike a balance between being able to get the feedback that's going to be important to make the game better. I think if we didn't have PTR at all, well, people wouldn't have had a chance to tell us after playing with and testing their set bonuses on target dummies or going into the raid that, hey, this feels kind of frustrating, or, you know, I don't like the way this interacts with my rotation. And we wouldn't want to lose all of that. That's not like finding bugs. That's just getting ahead of important feedback that's going to make the game better for more people.
Yeah.
But the flip side is, yeah, there's something magical about just a sense of mystery and discovery that's really hard to get. It's impossible to preserve in the modern day and age. Like, everything's going to be on the internet. There's going to be guides.
It's on YouTube or whatever. Yeah.
But like, yeah, the more it's out there before the thing is even official.
Yeah, because like basically they're just talking about like the world first race with this. Because I'm not even talking about like everyone who plays WoW is going to see it when we do it live, because that's not true. But like, it's impossible to me to think of a cutting edge guild getting to a boss like Halandris, or really just name any boss that's like not something you can kill in one pull, and be like, you know what, we're just gonna do this, like, we're not watching the world first video, and by the way, I expect all 20 of you to abide by that, and like, we're just gonna figure it out on our own. That's just like not how WoW works. Like, no one would do that. That's like you not even respecting the people around you's time. You just want to like finish the bosses and finish the tier, get cutting edge, get loot, whatever, right? Like that's not a thing. Like, keeping it like as like initially blind progression only affects like a couple of guilds, and then every single other guild that plays this game will look at it before doing it, right? So it's just interesting like who they would be doing that for. That's another thing of like where you're making changes for the entire game. You would be making a change and having less testing on these bosses basically just for a few guilds, right? If you make the argument about everything else, like don't make changes for a few people, you'd pretty much be doing that here. However, it would be sick as fuck for Race World First viewership though, and us, but yeah.
Actually launched, the more there isn't even that tiny window to enjoy a sense of discovery. I know you played this game a bunch, like, played a lot of Elden Ring right when it came out a couple months ago, and one of the really fun things about that first week, especially with how vast that game was, is like you could go to a wiki and the wiki would be blank because people hadn't figured it out yet. You could, find a cave and be like, I don't know what I'm going to find here, and no, there's nothing that will tell me.
Shit's insane.
Right now. Of course, over time the meta gets solved, but being able to feel like you have that sense of discovery and exploration is something we'd love to get back to, and just working on encryption technology, working on thinking about how we can test portions of our game without revealing the whole thing for everybody. All that is stuff that I think is in our long-term plans.
That would be awesome. And yeah, I totally agree. It's like whenever there's something new in the game and nobody really knows how it works, I think that a really good example of this on a small scale is the puzzles. Whenever the community is working together to figure out the puzzles, that's like one of the most hype moments for everybody. So I'm really glad to hear that.
Oh, he's talking about those like super crazy, like hive mind, deep state, we live in a society discords that exist where they like do the craziest fucking niche shit and they actually work together to figure out. Yeah, I do think those are cool as fuck, by the way. There's like no way to do that in Raid really, but yeah. That is
Next
cool.
thing I was wondering about is the what do you think's going to happen? Like now Wrath of the Lich King Classic coming out. Obviously, Wrath of the Lich King is going to run its course. Then what?
Good question.
Yeah, so at this point, you
guys ready for BFA Classic in like 5 years? Is that what it is?
From the community as a whole, what you want to come next. I think we have a player base that really has made Classic their home. Many people who've carried their characters forward from Classic into Burning Crusade and likely into Wrath beyond that. And when that comes to an end, when you defeat the Lich King, when you kill Halion, the ultimate end boss of Wrath of the Lich King.
Oh yeah.
Can't forget Ruby Sanctum. Come on. Do you want to start over? Do you want to try a different version of that? Do you want to carry that character forward into a new adventure? I know if Cataclysm for many people was like, oh, that's the beginning of the end, and I'm out.
It's a world revamp, yeah.
I'd ask like an interesting question is maybe like, what is it about Cataclysm that you don't like? Was it the heroic dungeons? Was bad? Is Firelands a bad raid? Is Twilight Highlands a bad zone?
Dude, Firelands is a banger raid, and okay, actually, even amongst casuals, I'm pretty sure some of the most positive things I've ever heard about Cata were how hard the heroic dungeons were when you first got there. But yeah, that doesn't have a ton of novelty. Like, you'd do them, and then now they'd probably be like giga easy because people are way better at video games than they were in Catalan. What am I saying? Cataclysm? Catalans. Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I think it's just this simple. And it's probably because they're so old, and it's when WoW first came out, and it's when a ton of people got their start in gaming. But there's definitely more nostalgia, both due to it being, early WoW and also just so long ago. There's a ton of nostalgia all the way from Classic all the way through Wrath. I think, maybe not even due to how good the expansion was, a noticeable, like, colossal mountainous drop-off of nostalgia after Wrath. And I think the best expansion in this game ever by far came out 2 expansions after that. But that's when the nostalgia falls off fucking hard. I mean, it looks like he doesn't answer this for too long, but I'd be surprised if Blizzard was like fully committed to going past Wrath.
Like, is that the problem? Or was it, I don't know, LFR and Dungeon Finder from the start and removing group quests from the world or whatever else, or compressing the talent trees? Like, what would it look like if you had Cata content with some changes? Lots of stuff is on the table, but I really welcome that discussion now that the fact that we're doing Wrath is, no longer the world's worst kept secret and actually something that's known, but we're listening.
Okay, that's great. I had no idea.
Basically, they're just going to play it by ear. Like, I don't know, man. Like, at the end of Wrath, if they announced Cata Classic, I really feel like it would just be such an underwhelming thing. I think the player count would massively drop, and it wouldn't be worth to kind of bring it all the way to MoP. Dude, just skip Cata. Even though Cata has a lot of, like, cool shit in it, just skip Cata.
Yeah, that there was like, you're just waiting to see what the community wants to hear. And I guess to a certain extent, that's kind of what you were probably doing with Season of Mastery, I'm assuming.
Very much so, yeah.
Okay, all right. I know we don't have a lot of time here, so I do want to do one last question. And so at the end of Legion, so like there's a cinematic, and Sargeras, as you know, stabbed the earth with a sword, and it's been there for quite a while, and I'm not really sure like where are things going with that.
Wait, what sword?
Okay. All right. I get it. I see. That's pretty much exactly what I would expect. Okay. Thank you, Ian. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, dude, I don't know why so many people have been spamming, like, what sword? I thought he was going to, like, unironically be like, what sword are you talking about? But he's clearly, like, not going to answer, so he says, what sword? That's, like, 10 times less epic than I thought it was going to be, or something. He's playing to the meme. It's a joke? Oh, okay, cool.
This was amazing. Yeah. I hope that we can do it again, by the way. So feel free anytime. Yeah, feel free anytime to come on my stream. If the PR is not going to freak out too much about it, please feel free. Come on my stream and hang out whenever you want.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you very much.
He will not do that.
And I'm looking forward to Dragonfight. I'll see you later.
Thanks, Zach. Take care.
Peace.
This is the thing that I'm concerned about when I do this, is I have no idea how to set this up, and I know for a fact it will be a disaster. I know for a fact I will get it wrong. Every time I've ever talked to people or interviewed them on my stream, I don't even show their camera because I don't know how. All right, cool. Well, damn, I don't have like a ton of... I feel like I went over most of my Masterloot thoughts. Man, it would be so nice. I'm pretty sure Masterloot existing and him implying that it would not work as just personal loot that's Masterlootable, meaning it wouldn't tailor to your group. That would basically, for us... Again, I'm not going to talk about the whole game. Just specifically now for just us and what we do, that's such a nice quality of life change because it basically means you don't need buckets. Like, for example, it is RNG. If you do a Master Loot run and you have 4 tier token people, and, you know, obviously there's not enough loot that drops for everyone to get 4-piece. So if, like, one of your runs gets, like, a ton of, like, Druid, Mage, whatever tier, then, like, the person who gets screwed on tier would just go into another Master Loot run. But, like, the thing is you're going to be, like, locked into how much actual time you have during the week to do, like, full heroic clears like that. Please do an interview with Ion. It would be so good, Max. Yeah, I am. I mean, like I said this earlier, but I reached out about doing one to be very specifically, like, class design and everything PvE. And they said it was a good idea, and they asked when I was thinking, and I just told them never around right now because there's a million interviews. I want to interview him or Morgan, like, shortly after Alpha is released and we've had, like, a couple weeks to play with this stuff. Couldn't they just lighten the restrictions on what you could trade? I mean, yeah, like I said, I don't think they would be doing it to reduce degeneracy. And also, Master Loot would be just as degenerate. The exact same amount of runs that are done and splits that are done right now would be done with Master Loot. Nothing like that would change. It would just have gear going to people that actually matter instead of it just being random. Asmongold didn't ask any hard questions, but he probably wants that Ian interview going forward. I think what a lot of Twitch viewers don't get is I see that comment a lot. They're like, yeah, you know, they went a little easy on the questions because they wanted that, like, repeat interview. But really, what you guys are expecting them to ask is actually just totally unrealistic. Like, you expect them to, like, windmill dunk on these people that they're interviewing, but it turns out that, like, how you interact with people in Twitch chat is just different than how you interact with humans. And I guarantee every single one of you that thinks you would, like, pipe up and open your mic talking to Ian and being like, hey man, so how do you feel about like your game being shit? And how do you feel about, you know, I'm asking the hard questions, not just being an asshole, by the way, but asking the hard questions. How do you feel about like everyone leaving and like the stuff that I like isn't there anymore, man? Like no one actually talks to other humans like that except for like complete freaks, right? Like none of you would do that. And they're not going to do that either because like they're not stupid. So yeah, I don't know. That's just how that works.